Welcome to Rex's Bible Minute, a weekly video where we talk about Jesus, Christianity, and anything along those lines. We are in week number 8 of our study of Revelation. We're working our way through the 7 letters. If you are new, this is your first time joining us, please go back and watch the past videos. You know, we're studying a book that was written with a sequential order, right? Sometimes it's easy to read the Bible and just be like, pick this verse, pick that verse, and it's great. And you're like, woo, that's everything. Everything's contained in this one nice little neat verse. But that's not the way this works. And that's not the way most of the Bible works. It works basically on you can't pick and choose without looking at the entire thought structure. And so the letter of Revelation, the book of Revelation, however you want to think about it, it is a story, but is written in a letter form. It was basically, it was written to encourage people. And so to read just a part of it here and there, you're really going to miss the whole thing. So go back, watch the previous videos, the previous lessons, listen to them if you're the podcast people. But make sure that you understand the background before we get into it, because I don't really want to spend a whole lot of time on it today. Just the basics, that this was written either by John the Apostle, the guy who wrote the Gospel of John, or it's written by one of his disciples. Either way, it's written by a guy named John who has very similar theology to what we find in the Gospel of John. And it was written to encourage, like I said, basically giving them God's point of view on their current situations during a time of upheaval and a lot of question marks, and by showing them, hey, this is how things are going to wrap up. This is what's going to happen. So be encouraged, right? And so it's written in a very different format. But again, go back, watch the background videos, get all the way up to this one, and you'll be caught up and understand what we're talking about. We're still in the letters, like I said, and the letters follow a format. So that's kind of how we're going through this. We'll use the pattern as our outline for each of these letters. We've only got 3 left, including today's. And so let's get into this. This week we're looking at the letter to Sardis. It's a little bit of a different letter. It's not the happiest of letters. So let's read it and then we'll break it down. So again, this is Jesus speaking. He's talking to John, the guy who wrote the letter, and saying, write down these things and deliver these to these 7 churches in Western Turkey. All right. And starting in verse 1 of chapter 3, it says, write this to the angel of the church in Sardis. These are the words of the one who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars. I know what you have done. You have the reputation of being alive, but you're dead. Wake up. Strengthen the things that remain, the things that are about to die, because I haven't found your works to be complete in the sight of my God. So remember how you received the message, how you heard it and kept it, and repent. So if you don't keep awake, I will come like a thief, and you won't know what time I'm coming to you. You do, however, have a few people in Sardis who haven't allowed their clothes to become dirty and polluted. They will be clothed in white and walk with me as they deserve. Anyone who conquers will be clothed like this in white robes, and I won't blot out their name from the book of life. I will acknowledge their name in the presence of my Father and in the presence of his angels. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. So Sardis is a wealthy city, right? It's no Ephesus. It's not one of these cities that was really prominent, but it was a very wealthy city. And it had a lot of history, right? So some of these cities didn't have a whole lot of things to look back to. To me, I think of this kind of like sports teams. I'm a big Manchester United fan, and Manchester United is a soccer team in England, if you don't know what they are. And they are one of the premier teams in history. They've got a history that goes back to the 1800s, and throughout that history, they've won things, right? They have a lot of trophies in their cabinets all the way back, going on back over 100 years. They've won everything that they could win. That doesn't mean they always win it every year, but they've won a lot of trophies. Well, Manchester United's rival team, one of them, that is right within their own city is a club called Manchester City. And they've been around almost as long, but they don't have nearly the history. Not a whole lot has happened. They haven't won nearly as much. They have won some things, but they haven't won near as much as United. So there's kind of a lack of history to stand on, to hold yourself up, to make themselves proud of. Look at everything that our team stands for. And then you have Tottenham, and Tottenham is in London, and they're a team that hasn't really won very much. They've been around a really long time, but they haven't won hardly anything. Right? They have no history to stand upon other than the fact that they've been around a long time. Or if in American terms, think of it like UK versus Louisville. UK is the winningest basketball program in history. Won tons of national titles, tons of tournaments, ton of SEC champs. What has Louisville won? No, not a whole lot, right? Like they've won some things, but it doesn't hold a candle to UK's past. Sardis is a city like Manchester United or like UK. They're a city that has a lot to be proud of. For a long time, they couldn't be conquered. They were kind of like Constantinople or whatever it's called nowadays. I can't believe I'm blanking on that. Regardless, you know what I'm talking about. They're in Turkey. But it's a city that just everybody thought it couldn't be conquered. It was built on top of this city with really sheer walls around it. It was a city that they didn't think they could be conquered. They survived battle after battle, war after war, and they had a past where they were conquerors. They were wealthy. They were winners. And so they had this kind of air of arrogance about them. They were also a city that was incredibly tolerant, especially for that day. The largest synagogue, the Jewish synagogue, the place where Jewish people met, it was located in Sardis. It was a massive synagogue by those standards, the largest one outside of Judea in antiquity. So they had a very large Jewish population. Not all cities tolerated Jewish people. They were even tolerant of Christians. It was a city that had a lot going for it. Right? It was wealthy, it was influential, it wasn't an Ephesus, but it had a lot of history to be proud of. So Jesus writes to the church in this city, and he describes himself here, again, if you remember from chapter 1, verses 13 through 18, that he describes himself as the one who is in control. And this is kind of our theme. That's what his description kind of sets for each of these letters, that Jesus is in control of his church. Now, this isn't a commentary on open theology versus closed theology, but this is a commentary that Jesus is in control of his church. Churches survive because he wills them to do so. Churches thrive because he wills them to do so, and they won't continue to do so if he does not. And so then if you remember from our pattern, it would go to, I know what you're doing well. And then it would go to, but I have this against you. And in the letter, he kind of says, I know what you have done. And you think this is going to be positive, but instead he says, but you got a reputation of being alive, but you're really dead. So he kind of combines them two to say nothing positive. Like there's not a whole lot positive to go on here at this church, which is really, really strange. Because this is a church that's not suffering. This is a church that has every opportunity to thrive. But that's the thing about comfortable churches. That comfort can lead to destruction. I mean, that's really kind of what he's saying here. He says, you guys aren't being persecuted, that your city is tolerant of you. You're not being forced to compromise your faith. You're not being hauled off and thrown in prison. You're not losing your jobs. I'm sure it's not all, puppy dogs and sugar. Like, it's not all great there because Christians as a whole were kind of ostracized from Roman society and Greek society. But still, this is a church that, by and large, especially compared to the other churches, they're not suffering. They have every opportunity to be thriving. But really, Jesus says, you from the outside looking in, you've got all the signs of being alive. You've probably got, a good attendance for your meetings. You've probably got good preaching happening, good solid teaching. There's no mention of heresy or anything like that. You guys are probably, giving money as you should, probably taking care of the poor as you should. Jesus doesn't critique any of those things like he does in other churches. He doesn't say, you're doing this, this, and this, they're wrong. He says, no, you look like you're alive, and everybody looking in says you're alive, but I am the God who knows your heart, and I can see you're actually dead. So what does that mean? And how do I know if my church is just the same thing? How do I know my church looks alive but is really dead? Well, we have to answer a couple questions. The first one is, what is the center of your church? Right? What is the center? The most important thing. Everything in your church is affected by the gravity of this one thing. What is that? Pretty much every Christian out there will say Jesus, unless they really have some warped theology or have had bad teaching. But they would say it's Jesus. Jesus is the center. And that's right. But in reality, that's not true. Right? Jesus has to be the center of everything. When you come together, it has to be about Jesus. The preaching has to be about Jesus. The singing, the worship, the praise has to be about Jesus. Giving has to be about Jesus. Prayers has to be about Jesus. Everything a church does has to be centered on the person and kingship of our Savior, Jesus Christ. If it's not, you're not alive. Everything we do has to be centered around the person of Jesus, around his ministry, around his kingdom, around him. That means some things churches do aren't really contributing, right? Everything a church does has to be held up against the measuring stick of, is this centered on Jesus or not? So is Jesus the center of everything? The next question is anything else the center? Right? Has something else creeped in? Has something that we started doing for a good reason for Jesus warped into something else? I mean, if we want to take a step back and look at some of the big churches out there, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a big successful church. A lot of churches went down this road and failed and never got big. But is your worship experience the center of everything you do? Do you have to have excellent music? Do you have to have super great singing, perfect guitars, awesome PA, awesome visuals, awesome this and that just go to an awesome worship experience? Is that the priority, or is Jesus the priority? Is having a super excellent sermon the priority that makes people feel good about themselves, that really hits those felt needs? Or is Jesus the priority? Is that class about reaching the lost, about helping the saints grow? Or is it about having a good class? Has something else creeped in and become the center of everything? Doesn't have to have started that way, but when you get comfortable, it can happen. We have to constantly be weeding out things, be measuring things against the person of Jesus. And is this program or this class or this thing that we do as a church, is Jesus the center of it or not? Because if it's not, it's killing us, and we need to get rid of it because it's diverting things away from the worship and pursuit of Jesus. The third question is, who provides what we do? And this is a big one. This is something a lot of Christians miss out on in a massive way because they think that we create the things that a church does. The things that a church does are provided by Jesus. We simply participate in them, right? So think about what a church does. It gathers. It is a community. We don't create the community. Jesus did that. We participate in the community. A lot of people out there think that they join a community and that they create the community and that their program or their class or their Sunday school or their small group or whatever, this or that is the community. No, the community is the church, and Jesus created it 2,000 years ago. We simply participate in it. Worship. We worship because God is worthy of it. We don't worship because we like to. We don't worship, we don't sing because it's the good thing to do or because it's attractive or because it makes us feel good. We do it because God commanded it. We participate in that. He provides it. He is the center of it. We don't create it. We participate in it. The learning, the teaching, the discipleship, those are all things that Jesus provides and we participate in. We don't create. We take those and we run with them, and we use our resources to the best we can to make those things great, to create environments where those things can happen. But Jesus is the one that does the creating, serving, giving, growth, discipleship, all the things a church does. Jesus creates those. We participate in them, not the other way around. But when we think that we're the ones who are creating them, that's when it becomes something other than what Jesus wants it to be. It's his church. He controls it. It's his things, the thing a church does. We participate in those things, not the other way around. And that is a massive change that the Western church needs to take in their mindset when it comes to church. And so he says in verses 3-5, remember how you received the message, how you heard it and how you kept it, and repent. So if you don't keep awake, I will come like a thief in the night, and you won't know what time I'm coming. You do, however, have a few people in Sardis who haven't allowed their clothes to become dirty and polluted. They will be clothed in white and will walk with me as they deserve. Anyone who conquers will be clothed like this in white robes, and I won't blot out their name in the book of life. I will acknowledge their name in the presence of my Father and in the presence of angels. So this is the solemn promise and warning meant specifically for this church and for all Christians. And to understand this, you need to understand a little bit about Sardis' past. Earlier, I mentioned that Sardis was thought to be impenetrable, that nobody could conquer it because it was up on this mountain with sheer cliff walls. It was super solid, easily defended city. But Jesus says, I will come like a thief in the night. 80 years prior to this, there was an earthquake that hit in the middle of the night that absolutely devastated the city, right? So there's that way that the Sardis citizens would have known, that the people of Sardis, the Christians of Sardis would have understood, hey, that happened in the middle of the night and we didn't expect it. You know, and twice in their history before, most famously in 546, they were conquered because people were not expecting it. Because soldiers fell asleep at their duty because they were comfortable and thought there's no way anybody could conquer us. The famous one was by Cyrus of Persia, Cyrus the Great. And in the middle of the night, his soldiers scaled the cliff silently and then snuck into the castle, snuck into the wall, they weren't in the castle there, but snuck into the city, and they took it. They thought they were impregnable, and therefore they were comfortable. And the end result was their destruction. This church is failing because Jesus is not the center of everything they do. They've made other things more important, and it has soiled their clothes. You know, this is a reference to a practice of, if you were going to the temple or to a festival, you wouldn't wear your dirty street clothes. You would wear a white robe to show that you were clean and pure, right? So that's what Jesus is attacking. He says, you guys are coming before me with dirty clothes on. The pagans don't even do that, right? And this isn't a commentary on how you should dress to go to church, okay? The church is not a temple. It is the people. So don't get me wrong. Like, you don't need to get dressed to the nines. It's not wrong to, but you don't have to because there's nothing that says it. What this is saying is your spiritual acts, the way you live your life, the things that you have made the priority, and the things that you have allowed to change you and twist you and make you into something else, you've become warped, you become dirty. You're not wearing the clean clothes, the clean faith of a Christian, the clean lifestyle of a Christian, and you're coming before me like that. He says, and the last thing is, this is the church that thinks that they are creating instead of realizing that Christ is providing. You know, Jesus will come upon them like a thief in the night, and he will take away this church. I mean, that's what he said in the first letter to Ephesus, that he would remove their lampstand, that a church that fails to be alive, that fails to be the church, stops being the church. I mean, essentially, that's the way it works. It's not that Jesus comes in and says, oh, you're done. It's that eventually the church will not be a church anymore because they've deviated on what they believe and how they act. You know, this is just essentially a call to stop the Christian mentality. You know, people who go around and look for this church or that church. I like this one. I don't like that one. If you find a healthy, solid church that is alive, that is doing the things it should be doing, that has Christ at the center and nothing else, that's a church to be a part of. But this whole following preachers or being upset because something happened that you didn't like that is not the church. It's not the way Christians should approach church. We should not be church shopping. We should be participating in the community that Christ has called us to be a part of. But in that same section, he says some are still clean. Some haven't soiled their clothes. Some are still pure. That means that they are holding to the teaching that Jesus taught them, holding to that foundational faith, and they are not allowing anything else to be the center of their lives. That doesn't mean they were perfect, right? That doesn't mean they didn't sin, okay? That's important that you understand that these people still have flaws. Everybody does. But they were holding true to the fact. They were aiming for God's standards in all their lives, and grace was covering how far they missed. He says they are conquering. Conquering relies on Christ, not the other way around. Same with the participation idea of church. You're participating in what Christ provides. Your salvation is participating in what Christ provided. And he says, and the end result was they will be clothed in white. Now, there was a practice that was done back then. We haven't really seen it much in modern history, but when an army or a king was victorious in battle, they conquered, they would come back and they would have a big parade called a triumphal entry. And the Romans, they took this to the max. They had it figured out. There was a big ritual. There was a specific way they did that. But one of the things was they didn't march in uniform. They marched in white robes. So this was essentially Jesus saying, they'll be part of my triumphal entry when I return. Those people who conquer, who rely on me, who are faithful to me, who are obedient to me, who keep me the center of their life. And it's just a reminder from a few weeks back, white represents purity and victory. So Jesus is saying they will be pure, they will be made victorious because of me, because of what I did. They will share in my victory and share in my triumphal entry. And then he says that they won't be blotted out of the book of life. Now, this is the first time this is mentioned, but it's going to come up a lot throughout our study of Revelation. The first thing that somebody in Sardis or any of these Greek city-states or these cities in Western Turkey would have understood would have been about the old Greek citizen registries. Greek cities kept a register of all of their citizens. Now, if one of those citizens did something that they were to be executed for, they would blot out that citizen's name from their list so that it wouldn't be held up against the city. Like, oh my goodness, we have this terrible person who lives amongst us. No, they would blot out their name so they would no longer have been counted as part of the citizenry of that city. And then in Jewish history, Exodus 32 through 33 says, but now if you will only forgive their sin, but if not, blot me out of the book that you have written. But the Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book. So even all the way back to Moses, we see that God has a book of life that has the names of his people in it. So we can see a couple of really big concepts from this little scripture, right? And I don't want to get into a big theology, I don't know how to say that, a doctrinal foundation here. But there are two schools of thought on your status as part of God's people, your salvation. There is the once saved, always saved, and there is the not once saved, always saved, that you could lose your salvation. And there's a lot of things that have to be finessed there, but basically it boils down to one group thinks that once you are saved, it's because God predestined you to be saved, and you will always be saved. And those who don't persevere in their faith, they never really were saved. So ultimately, it kind of plays out the same no matter which way you look at it. And the other group says that you can be saved and that you can walk away from it. And typically, this group says that it's when you walk away from it, when you intentionally are saying, I'm done with Jesus, I'm walking away, or you decide to just live in sin. You might still believe in Jesus, but if you don't have that obedient faith, then you've walked away from it. And so just the thought here is that I think this supports the latter, because you don't start out in the book, right? You don't start out. Once you become of age and you are responsible for your actions, you are a sinner. Therefore, you have fallen below God's standards, and you're not in the Lamb's Book of Life until you become a Christian. And so that means if your name was blotted out of the book, that means it was written in there. You became a Christian. Oh, now you're not anymore, blotted out. So just some food for thought. Think about that. Again, people much smarter than me stand on both sides of that argument. That's where I stand. But again, just trying to give you the information so you can make your own decision. And then it finishes out with this letter with, let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. And that's kind of how he closes this one. And so from this letter, we can see a couple really big ideas that we need to keep close to our hearts. The first one is no myth Christianity. We need to stop approaching church like something that we go to make us feel good, that we go to because it provides some benefit to our lives. The church will. A healthy church that is doing the things it should be doing, the way it should be doing it, will absolutely lift up its members like nothing else in this world can. You will never be alone. When you are suffering, you will never have to go through that on your own. When you are victorious, when you're joyful, you will have people there celebrating with you. Churches fail because churches are made up of people. But a healthy church is something that we have to choose to participate in. That when it comes to our spiritual growth, we choose to participate in that. That when it comes to our giving, we're choosing to participate. When it comes to worship, we are choosing to participate that. We have to view these things as things that Jesus provides and we participate in, not things we create and we give to him. Because that leads us to a Christian philosophy of, well, this church is bad, therefore we got to go to a different one. No, churches are flawed. But each church it has things in it that Jesus provides that we participate in. And we have to change our mindset to that. The other thing is that comfort can be lethal. Here in the West, we've started to experience some very minor inconveniences for being a Christian. It's usually in the form of a comment on the internet. Not really that big a deal. There are some legal issues that some have had. Some have lost businesses, things like that. We're starting to see like the beginnings of some persecution for our faith. And that is waking a lot of Christians up. We're not seeing as many cultural Christians as we used to, as people who are just in it because it's what they're supposed to identify as or what they're choosing to identify as, and their life doesn't correlate to that, doesn't correlate to how they're living, to what they believe. And so we're starting to get uncomfortable, and I think that's a good thing. I've said this for years now, that being uncomfortable as Christians is a good thing because it shakes us out of it. Those who truly aren't about it won't be here. The pandemic showed us who really was part of the church. And that might seem harsh, but those who came back after churches reopened, they were there for the most part because they truly believed it. They truly lived it out. They truly wanted to participate in the community of Christ. A lot of people just weren't that committed. And when we get to the last letter, you're going to see what Jesus thinks of those kind of people. And I don't say this to like browbeat anybody, but that's kind of the fact of the matter. That we can't have this lukewarm Christianity where we just identify as Christians, but it doesn't show up in what we live. It shows up in our priorities, show up in how we live out our life. We can't be like that. Jesus says it's not okay. That was the problem with this church. That Sardis looked like they were alive. They were good Christian people who did a lot of good things. But behind it all, Jesus wasn't there. Jesus wasn't truly the king of their lives. They didn't truly live their lives in a way that made him the king, that made him the center of their universe, that in a way that when they get to the other side of life, on the other side of Judgment Day, they're going to be satisfied with Jesus. Hopefully, this is encouraging for some of you. I hope this is convicting. But either way, if you have any questions, as always, reach out to me. Otherwise, see you next week.